Hello, this is Dr. Flight. I hope you're doing well. This is a video that continues our communication and messaging plan process. And so this will be the second video in this short series. And what we want to do here is we looked at already the first two steps of the planning process, which included defining the audience that you would want to message to, and then also looking at the different objectives that you might engage in as a marketing manager when we're trying to talk about a product and talk about things that we want to do. So step number three then, which will be the primary focus of this video, a fairly short video, will deal with and talk a little bit about some of the nuances of advertising budgeting. Now, budgeting for media campaigns can be extremely tricky, and there's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot that goes into it. So on the outset, I'd say that in many different companies will outsource the media buying process and also the budgeting process. And I know that seems like something you don't want to outsource. Basically, at the end of the day, is you'll have a certain amount of money that you can devote to your campaign. And you'll want to do some type of a cost analysis, and you'll want to understand, well, how much what am I getting for my money? Like, what's my marketing return on investment or my advertising return on investment, or ROI on this spend that I'm going to make? And at the end of the day, it can be really complicated because there are a lot of different types of media, different forms of media, different ways you can, communicate a message, and they all come at different costs, and they all have different effectiveness levels. And so, kind of balancing the effectiveness of your campaign with how much you're spending is really kind of what the analysis is all about. So we'll talk about a couple things today, but again, this is a conversation where you could take a whole course in media buying and media budgeting. And a lot of companies, again, will outsource this. So if I'm a marketing manager, good chance I'm not doing this directly, but I'm hiring another company to do it. Okay, so when we look at our budgeting, when we look at like buying media, we want to be able to design what we call a campaign, where we put our message out on maybe multiple different mediums, and we calculate how effective each of those mediums are. So collectively, we have this idea where we want to try to get the message out to as many people as we can, as effectively as we can, within a budget, so we want to minimize message cost, I should say cost per exposure. It's like one of the goals we have. So we have a cost per exposure, and we like how many people are we reaching with this budget. Those are the types of things that we're thinking about. So as we're doing this, we want to think about how many times the message is going to be heard, for how long, what type of period, what will the duration be, and what types of media we'll use to be able to control that. Some considerations we might think of: the nature and the size of the market, how much the message will stick, how reactive the audience will be to our message. Some audiences are easier to reach than others. They're easier to find than others. Some audiences, for instance, don't watch television. They don't listen to radio. So those mediums are not going to be available to us. We'll have to use other mediums. Some audiences like to read, so we need to use magazines and newspaper, which is, again, kind of like a different dynamic. And we have to know that, and we have to understand the costs associated with that. We also should understand kind of where the product is in the product life cycle. In the early stages of the product launch, for instance, when the product is introduced, you need a lot more money, a lot more budget, and a lot more awareness building than you do later on. Once the product hits the middle of the growth stage, then the amount of money you spend on advertising and messaging can drop dramatically. because there's a lot of word of mouth going on, and the communication about your product starts to pick up steam among buyers and consumers. So you don't have to advertise as much. So there are a bunch of dynamics then that kind of go into this idea of an advertising budget. A lot of times, though, the focus is going to be on the efficiency and the effectiveness of the ad campaign. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the things we look at when we're talking about this component. Okay, and be two terms, three in all here, but two terms right away that we need to know. And I like to think of these two, that they really go with cost. We have this budget that we have, this limited amount of money, but number one, we have this concept called reach. Reach is the percentage or the number, but oftentimes we call it a percentage of the market that is reached by our message. So in other words, if I have a market of consumers, a market segment that I've defined, and I put a message out there, and let's say the message is reached or reaches 65% of the market, then my reach is 65%. I'm reaching 65% of my, possibly the people who I think will buy my product. So obviously, the higher the reach, the better you have in selling your product. But of course, the more people you reach, the more expensive it is, right? So for reaching a lot of people, typically it's going to cost more. It'll also have a big influence and define what type of media you buy as well. So like if I do a TV ad, I reach a lot of people. That ad might be expensive to do, but I'm reaching a lot of people. If I choose to use direct marketing, the number of people I reach will be fewer because of the type of mediums that you use. Now, it might be more effective. You might have a better messaging campaign as a result of it, but the reach will be much, much, much smaller. Okay, so consider thinking about reach, how many people you're going to reach in your campaign. Number two is something called frequency. Okay, so like it's okay to reach somebody, but for a message to be heard, internalized, and then acted on, it has to be told several times. You can't just send a message out once and expect people to sort of behave on it. You typically have to send a message out between 5 to 8 times or so for it to be what we call effective. So there's something called an effective frequency, and it's the number of times a message has to go out before it is internalized and acted upon. And you know this idea, like you hear a message maybe on the radio or on TV, you hear it once and you kind of pick up some of it, but you don't hear the whole thing, or you don't remember the whole thing. And then you hear the message again and again and again, you hear the ad, you see the ad 5 or 6 times, and after that, okay, you know what's going on, you know what it's about, you know what you should do. If it's asking you to do something. So this idea of frequency then becomes super, super important. And we're going to come back to reach and frequency in a minute or two. The last thing or concept that I want you to know about is something called continuity. And this is a term. So continuity or continuousness, and this refers to like the pattern of advertising. Okay, and so when we talk about continuity, there's really 3 different types. One is called continuous, and in a continuous strategy is where we have advertising happening all the time. It's continuous. We have a second type, which is called flighting, F-L-I-G-H-T-I-N-G, flighting. And this is when we advertise for an intense burst of time, an intense period of time, and then we do none. So it's like we do for like a month, we'll advertise real heavily and then won't advertise at all. Okay, the third type is called pulsing. Pulsing is when we do a bit of advertising and then we take a break, and then we do a bit more of advertising and then a break, and then on a regular basis. So it's kind of like a pattern of flighting, if you will. So it's a pattern of advertising broken up by periods of when you do less. You don't have to do none, but you do less during the non-pulsing times. So if you do like a media campaign, we'll often put together a calendar, and we'll talk about like when we're going to do advertising and what mediums we're going to use. But also in the calendar, we'll show like this idea of continuity, whether it's a continuous, like newspaper co-op advertising. You see how we're going to put money into that each month throughout the calendar year. And so that's like a continuous buy, where it's continuous. And the blue lines, again, they sort of represent money we're putting into the budget for these activities. Saturday cartoons, you might think of that as continuous, but really it's probably a flighting type of a thing. Also, television specials in November is definitely a flighting piece where we have an intensive buy in November, but we don't do anything else the rest of the year. Direct mail, May and June indicate a flighting where we're having intense buy May and June, but we're not using that any other time in the year. Okay, and then in magazines, we're using kind of an alternating pulsing method where we have two different magazines. We're always going to have a magazine that we're advertising in, but we're going to take alternating weeks. And so we're going to do them at different times, kind of pulsing on, off, on, off, on, off for each one of those. Okay, so again, this is kind of the idea of continuity. There are different times, I guess, or different applications. Continuous might be for reminder campaigns, mature product lifecycle campaigns, where you just want a constant presence. You don't ever want to go away. You just want a constant presence in terms of your advertising. For a flighting schedule and a pulsing schedule, flighting especially is popular if you have a highly seasonable product. So let's say we have a product, we live near the beach, maybe our product's a beach product, we have a lot of tourists in the summer seasons, so we do a ton of advertising, like say from May through August. But then we do very little advertising the whole rest of the year. If that's the case, that's a flighting schedule. So highly seasonal products would make sense for those. Okay, finally, pulsing. You can use a pulsing strategy when your budget is it needs to be dynamically spent, I guess. There could be some nice uses of a pulsing schedule for seasonality issues. But if your product's sold all year and you want to have, you don't want your message to get lost. So you do media buy for like 2 or 3 weeks, and whatever you do, it's like a big deal. And then you take a month off, and then you do another pulse for 3 or 4 weeks. And again, it's a big deal. And so it's like when people hear your ads, they perk up because it's something new to them. Whereas a continuous advertising schedule, you can get kind of lost sometimes, can be lost in your messaging. Where pulsing kind of invigorates, gives you a new thing that you're doing each time you do it. Okay, so again, this is kind of this idea of continuity and kind of planning and scheduling dictated by typically when your consumers buy, your product type, but to some degree also your budget. Okay, so kind of let's go back a little bit though. Let's talk again about this idea of reach and frequency. And we're going to define these, and we're going to kind of maybe make a little illustration here. So first and foremost, we mentioned this idea of reach. It's the percentage of different targets or consumers or listeners who have been exposed to a message at least once over a period of time. Okay, so let's say we run this ad campaign. We're doing it on television, and we want to know like what percentage of our audience has seen the ad, has been exposed to the ad, right? Once. Okay, and those are unique consumers. So if somebody hears the ad twice, then they still count just as one because it's the percentage of unique buyers. Okay, another term, average frequency. So this is the average number of times the reached audience, households or consumers, have been exposed to the ad. Okay, so one person might hear the ad 3 times, and that would be 3. So take all of the people who hear your ad and average out how many times they've heard it or seen it in the designated period of time. It has to be within a time frame. Okay, and again, remember that number needs to be high enough for people to remember what you're doing and why you're doing it. So it can't be that you run the ad once on TV over, say, a month. You might have to run the ad 10 times over the period of the time of the month, and the average frequency might be 4 or 5 or something like that, right? If you run the same ad during the same TV show, then obviously that average frequency is going to go up. And again, it kind of depends on your budget, how many times you can run the ad, and during what audiences you're gonna run it, and when they're gonna see it, and some things like that. Okay, so again, reach and frequency. Some applications of reach and frequency though that are helpful. One would be something called a gross rating point. The other one will be gross impressions. So when we talk about gross rating points, what we want to do is we want to combine the idea of reach and frequency. And this is important because this is a tool you can use when you compare different mediums. So say I'm doing a TV ad and a radio ad and advertising on a social app. You know, all 3 of those are very different ways to communicate. But each one of them, I can identify how many people I'm reaching and how often those people are being reached. And then I can look at how much I'm spending on each. So in this example, we have reach times frequency. So this is a percent reach times how many times the message is being seen. This would be an average frequency. So we have 80% reach, average frequency of 4. Multiply those 2 together, and what we have is what's called a gross rating point, or a GRP, or grip. The grips for this one buy is 3.2. Now, here's the deal. What I'll do is I'll calculate a GRP, a grip for television, for whatever the other mediums are, radio, and for the app ad that I'm running. So I'll actually have 3 different grips, and I'll have a dollar amount that I'm spending on TV. I'm also spending a dollar amount on radio and on also the app. So I can compare how many grips I'm getting based on how much I'm spending, right? So it's a comparison thing. So I can understand maybe how effective or how efficient each one of the mediums are compared to the other based on impressions and our reach. Okay, final thing we'll throw at you here is this gross impressions, or the total number of impressions that we have. So what we do is we take our grip and we multiply it by our market size. Okay, so this is total impressions, or gross impressions would be how many times within your market is the ad being seen, or is the message being heard, right? So total times. So it's like your frequency, it's your grip times total market size. And in this example, we have a total market size of 5 million. On average, the grip is 3.2, and so 3.2 times 5 is going to give us 16 million gross impressions. And again, what we can do is we can take that number and we can apply it to our budget, and we can kind of decide whether that's a good, like, am I getting my money's worth? Is 16 million gross impressions a good number for what I'm spending? Now, once we change mediums, this will all change, right? I change a medium, the reach changes and the frequency changes, so I can compare and contrast the efficiency and effectiveness of each different media type, and be able to effectively decide what I'm going to spend my money on. So again, as we look at this, again, consider this idea that this is a big science, a big research component to advertising, and a lot of companies will outsource this whole process to a company that is like that's all they do. So media buying companies, it's what they do. It's what they do for a living. They calculate all of this and they put together the best and most efficient buys for your money. And so that's why a lot of companies will outsource it. Okay, so as you're moving forward, think about budgeting. Think about kind of this idea of reach, frequency, the combining of reach and frequency to form a gross rating point. This concept of impressions, but then also throw in the three types of continuity that we're looking at, whether it's continuous schedule, a flighting schedule, or a pulsing schedule. Okay. All right. So, hey, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. And obviously, like always, please let me know if you have any questions. Happy to answer.